Hopefully that is now recording, and there will be a strange transcription in the corner there. Okay, if there are questions that you'd like to rather put in the chat, that's absolutely fine. I'll try and come back to the chat towards the end. And if there is time, if there are specific questions, then it might be, if you don't mind, being on screen or raising your hand and asking them verbally, that will be okay too. Okay. So let's start then, and I'm going to start by sharing my screen with you while I'm doing that, and I'll just introduce myself formally. So my name is Tracy Kilcoyne. I'm Programme Leader for the BA Primary Education Programme and also Placement Lead for our undergraduate trainees. And this evening, the plan is to just take you through the ERPD. So for some of you, this might be the first time you've used the ERPD, and I hope you find it useful. For others, it might be a refresher, and you are very welcome. And for others, this might be just you've popped in to see if there's anything new. So, you know, I hope that everybody gets something out of this session that they need. But again, we've got question time if you need that, and you can also place things in the chat. For colleagues who've just joined us, I am recording this session, so I've muted everybody just so that we've got a nice clean recording. And you might not want to have your camera on so that you are not on screen because we are recording. So that is your choice. Okay. So in terms of the ERPD then, so I've got a mock-up, a test ERPD on screen that hopefully you can see. And if any of you are able to just give me a thumbs up and you've got that facility on your Teams facility, that would just reassure me that you're seeing what I'm hoping I want you to see. I've got a wave, Emma, thank you. So that's reassuring. So the ERPD is the Electronic Record of Professional Development, and that is used by the university during the time that the trainees are with us to document their journey as a trainee into their early career. And the idea of the ERPD is that it should be something that the students access in the main. It's their responsibility. Although we do ask that mentors in schools and along with the university-based mentors have some engagement with it. And that's the way that we would give feedback to students, but we'll go through that as we go through this session. So the first activity that a student should be doing when they arrive on placement with you is inviting you to access their ERPD. And I know many of you have been mentors with us for some time, and that is brilliant. And we really appreciate your continuous engagement with us. But if you've had access to the ERPD before, you might find you can log on, but you can't access the particular student that's working with you, their portfolio, because under GDPR now, the access is time limited. So for partners in school, the students need to use this invite participant section here that I'm circling on screen. And they need to click on that and fill your details in on a new invitation. And they will add you as a school-based mentor, which is here. And that will then send you an email with an invitation in it. The email is time limited, so it's really important that if you've received that email that you click on it and access the ERPD within, I think it's 24 hours. Otherwise, it will lock you out and the student will have to invite you again. Okay, so that's something that the student should be doing within the first couple of days of arriving in school. Once you've got access, you will be able to look at what's gone before on the ERPD and what the student adds as they spend time with you. There will be some aspects that you will only have read-only access to, and there will be other aspects that you actually have read and write access, okay? So I'm going to sort of go through the mentor-based tasks, if you like, initially, but if there are any other questions about roles and responsibilities with the ERPD, please do feel free to put those in the chat. Now, adding any templates to the ERPD, we do this by using the add button here, which gives us access to a number of drop-down choices there, or by going into records and using the purple add button there. I don't mind which way you use that. I find this screen, records, easier to navigate than the timeline, because you can filter here using this left-hand menu in terms of support for getting to the template that you need immediately. So when we add templates, whatever it is, if you can't find it in one of these drop-down menus, it might be that it's just hidden somewhere else in one of the other areas. So I'm just quickly flicking through now to show you that behind each of those drop-down menus, there are specific templates. So the first template that we ask the students to add is this action plan. And prior to placement, all trainees, depending on which placement they're on with you, should have started to think about their own priorities for placement. So the trainees will complete what we call a trainee placement action plan here at the university. And they will do that based on their knowledge and understanding of where they are in their training. So I'm just going to click on this one to show you what's in there. So the trainee action plan is based around our BGU teacher training curriculum. And we've used the core content framework to identify our curriculum for the trainees, and we've put them under these umbrella terms: behaviour, professional behaviours, curriculum, pedagogy, assessment, inclusion and wellbeing. So when they're with us in the university, they'll have lectures in these areas, they'll have self-study, independent reading, assignments, activities and tasks to complete to develop their knowledge and understanding of these different areas. Then when they were on their previous placements, so those of you who are, pardon me, who are hosting a developing placement trainee, they will have already completed some of the ERPD and have identified things that they've worked on, their progress, and identified what's going well, what's the strength, and what needs to be worked on some more, what's an area for development for themselves. So the idea of this template is that prior to placement, they will have identified under each of these terms a priority or what their rationale is for behaviour. So for some students, it might be to use more rewards, or it might be about becoming familiar with the school's behaviour policy and implementing consistently the behaviour policy. So there will be a range of things. It might be that professional behaviours, it's about developing their assertiveness or maybe their teacher persona. And under curriculum, there may be things that they're working on in terms of subject knowledge, or it might be around understanding of the curriculum. So if they've had a placement in Key Stage 1, they might not have a secure understanding of Key Stage 2 curriculum yet. So the idea is that they reflect on what happened previously and sort of establish themselves a priority. And within each of these, they're asked to sort of make an idea or a plan around when they might focus on those things, because there's quite a lot here and they're not going to focus on it all in prelim week or week 1 or the latter weeks of placement. So we're getting them to think realistically about when would it be appropriate to look at curriculum. And often what we find is the students are focused on behaviour management and professional behaviours in the early weeks of placement. And then we encourage them to write a SMART target. And sometimes you'll find students have the targets may be very generic, and it might be that they need support to make them a little bit more specific and achievable while they're with you on placement. And that would be great opportunity for that first preliminary meeting to actually talk through their targets and how they might achieve them. And then this document sits on the ERPD open throughout placement, and the students might add additional targets in this box as they work towards them and achieve them. So they might at the first week have a placement target, around developing subject knowledge in phonics for I don't know, phase 2. And then as the weeks go by, they move on and have achieved that top target, and they might just write something there, achieved week commencing 12th of February, for want of a better date. And then they might set themselves targets that come from one of the other templates. By the end of placement, we would expect that they have reviewed this and then submit it right at the end. So just for those of you who've not used the ERPD before, if you submit a document, it locks it, okay? So the best thing to do is, until you're happy that the documents that you add are complete, don't submit, which is here. Use the go back button, and then that way you can re-access it. So what we have in records is a column here, so you know that you can still re-access those documents. So another document that's really important that both yourself and the trainee will use is a weekly record. So in the weekly record drop-down menu, you'll see this item, Weekly Curriculum Progress Review, or WCPR. So every week, the trainees should add one of these to their ERPD prior to meeting with you to discuss what's going to happen in the coming weeks, whether that's in a PPA time or whether it's after school in a end of day session. And then what they should be doing is then reviewing. So it's not letting me add one for some reason, I'm not sure why. Maybe it's the date. No. So in terms of the weekly review, no, it's not there. Let me go back and find another one. So in terms of a weekly review meeting, the students should be completing this top box here, trainee reflection, prior to coming to the meeting with you. And we encourage them to reflect on something that's happened in the week preceding the meeting. It usually is just one or two things that they've experienced, might have been what we call a critical moment in their understanding of their role as a teacher, and they should identify what the statements are linked to. So if, for example, they started to use behaviour management effectively in the classroom, applying your classroom sanctions and rewards and the policy, and they saw the benefits of that, that might be something that they reflect on in there. Often what we find is students write a narrative, almost like an old-fashioned journal, and that's not what we're looking for here. We're looking for students to reflect. So say what the event was. So it might be that on the 12th of February, supporting a maths group, year 5, fractions. I used rewards to motivate the children in the group. Now, we don't want them to write a whole narrative about what happened during that session. What we're looking for is, what was the reward? What was the impact of that on the children's progress? and what was the impact on them as a teacher, i.e., are they going to do it again? Are they going to try and remember to transfer that reward and use it in every lesson? What have they learned about the use of stickers, for example, or class dojo? Is it that the dojo has a greater impact if it's immediate and at the moment of a recognition for the child? Or is it that actually they waited till the end of the lesson to give the rewards out and that child lost that specificity around what they were getting the reward for? So we hope that they're being reflective rather than descriptive. So in the weekly meeting, they may have reflected on a number of these areas, and we would say no more than 3 areas. So they might talk about professional behaviours, and they might talk about their learning of assessment and use of assessment. And then in the dialogue, in the meeting, we ask that one of you, whether it's the student or yourself, are logged into the ERPD and can just keep a bullet point record of your meeting. So in that meeting, the professional discussion might be about 1 or 2 of those reflections, or it might be purely about what's gone on during the week that's gone well and what you're building on or working on next and how they're going to engage with the children in terms of behaviour management. So there might be a bullet point discussion about using the class rewards consistently. So it might be that they've been giving stickers, as frequently students do, to the children who really shine out, but they're missing some of the children that are quiet and undemanding. So we're looking for consistency around the use of those rewards. And so you might have just make a note of using the rewards consistently will be a foci for the coming week. And then you might actually commit to, I'm going to use a topper to give formative feedback over 3 phonics lessons with the student. It might be then that you record agreed teaching to be, and then whatever the teaching is, agreed planning, which lessons were going to be planned, planning responsibilities, and you might also write there deadline for draft plans to be shared with SDM by, and whatever that is. So you can record in there whatever route your conversation goes in terms of the conversation. Okay, you could get the student to type while you're meeting, but I would suggest that you do that in the meeting so that work-life balance, it's done. And then here in the targets, it might be that we've talked about using rewards consistently, so we type 1, 2 or 3 targets for the coming week that you want to see them addressing. They could be linked to the things that you've talked about in their reflection. They could be linked to this professional discussion, or they could be linked to feedback you've given them formally on a previous observation. And then finally, we ask that if there are things that the student is struggling with in terms of subject knowledge and development, that you record it here. So a summary of any specific areas where they might need additional support or intervention from us. So if there is subject specific stuff that you put in there, you might click curriculum, and then in here, student requiring greater depth of knowledge. Sorry, typing on screen is quite a challenge. Knowledge and understanding of phonics phase 2 information And it might be that one of their targets links to that around going away and doing some independent reading, or even going back to the lectures that they've had. See lectures and notes from sessions at BGU. And I know that you might not know what sessions they've had, but I'll show you in a second. On the website, we have a list of things there, so you could direct them to go and check back what teaching and input they've had in the year or the months prior to placement. You might also note in there if there's a half term, for example, coming up, opportunity to make contact with staff back at BGU to support their subject development. The reason we ask you to fill this box in is because it will trigger a red flag, if you like, not in a bad way, but to us at the university, that there is a student needing additional support from maybe a subject expert back here at the university. And we can download that report and make contact with the student, maybe not mid-placement if they're on a placement far away from uni, but when they come back to us, we can create responsive sessions to address those gaps in their knowledge and understanding. And then finally, in the meeting, we would like you to agree that you feel the student is on track. And if they're not on track, whether there is a personal support plan needed. Now, occasionally there are students who are on track, but we decide to put them on a PSP just to keep them focused on the right things. Occasionally, we have students who are not on track and they do need a support plan. Whatever the circumstances, we ask, can you please email the university-based mentor and let them know that you're going to be putting them on a support plan and writing one, and we'll look at that in a second. In a very rare occasions, we would expect a cause for concern. And if you are thinking a student needs a cause for concern, then before that's issued, please do contact us. Whether it's me as placement lead and the university-based mentor, we would need to direct you with that and support you. Because just as we have procedures in school for dealing with capability, it's the same for students. And we'd never jump to cause for concern without a serious incident. So the sort of progress you like is, or the progression for students is, that we have a period of supporting them on a PSP first before we move to cause for concern. But if the issue is significant, then yes, of course, we will intervene and make that decision to go to a cause for concern with you, should that be the case. So once that's completed, this can be submitted, and it will ask you to make sure you've answered all of the questions before you've submitted. So I haven't put a target in there, so I'm just going to pretend to put a target in there so that we can. Okay, and it will check. So just in case you think, oh gosh, no, I might not have finished, you can then come back to this and tweak it if you need to. But just a reminder that once it's submitted, you will not be able to amend that document. But we do ask that when you submit them, that they stay submitted. You try and submit them, and there it is, look, completed, it goes green. You do that in a timely manner so that we've got knowledge that the students are completing their reflections. Okay, so I was going to show you now, let's have a look, the ITE website. So we have an ITE document centre, which has links to all of the relevant paperwork and support materials. So we've asked students to show you this, but maybe they've not had chance yet. But if you can, it might be useful to just pinpoint this on the top of your toolbar so that if you need anything, you can find it here. So in primary ITE documents, you scroll down and in there are copies of the guidance that the students should have shared with you with regard to their specific placement. There are Word documents and copies of materials there for you. And I've just spoken to you about signposting students to things that they've been doing back at university. Here is what we call pre-placement learning summaries. These are documents where we've outlined what the teaching was prior to coming on placement. So you'll see an overview of the sorts of things they've done in year 2 prior to developing placement. And also it will open a Word document. You can see what they will have done in year 1. So, you know, if you do want to go and have a look when, you know, like your children come home and say, oh no, we haven't done that, we can assure you that they have done some work, and it's builds on year in a spiral type curriculum. So there are things there that they will have covered, and you'll be able to signpost them to them. And then finally, another area that you might find useful is this section called video tutorials. So to support you in using the ERPD and support the students, we've put together a series of very short 1 and 2 minute, up to 6 minute long videos where you might just think, I can't remember how to do that. You can actually download these and watch YouTube videos and fast forward to the bit that's relevant. Okay, so I hope that you find those useful. But what might be most useful is putting the ITE Document Centre in your homepage so you can get to it rapidly. So we've talked about the how to invite you to access the ERPD, the weekly curriculum review. I'm now going to look at this, the document that you as a UBM will use every week, and it's called the Trainee Observation and Progress Record, the TOPR. So again, just for those who were a little bit late joining us, you can add a new TOPR by clicking on observation, and you'll see that it's there, look, Trainee Observation and Progress Record. So you can add one directly into this ERPD. We've got one open here, so I'm just going to use this rather than add another one. Now, we get quite a lot of feedback about the TOPR, that there's a lot here to fill in, and I think it's really important that you know you are not expected to fill in every single section on this TOPR. This is a multifunctional pro forma, if you like, and it can be used in a multitude of ways. So it might be that you are giving subject-specific feedback. You might have decided that the student has not demonstrated secure subject knowledge in phonics, for example, again. And therefore, in the weekly meeting, you've agreed that you're focusing on phonics in the coming week, and you're going to do a some observation of phonics. And that might be just looking at a small section of the phonics, the input, or you might be looking at the questioning in phonics. You might be looking at the addressing misconceptions in phonics. So this part of the TOPR would be quite pertinent to you, and you would note that when you're observing that it's about phonics, and then you can use this as a pure one lesson observation or a series of lessons. So if you're commenting on and giving a narrative feedback about one subject, you might like to give them feedback over 3 or 4 days when they teach phonics. So in that case, you might add something like Monday and then do some feedback. And then when you observe them again Tuesday on the example, rather than do another template, you've agreed the foci. You might be looking at their use of questioning to elicit the children's understanding, or you might be looking at their use of resources, or you might be looking at their use of vocabulary, and you can give feedback over a period of time. So that's one way that you can use the TOPR. You might want to use it to give feedback on a particular generic professional behaviour. So you might be focusing the student on developing behaviour management and professional behaviours. So in that case, you might, well, whatever target, you will type that target in there, and you could cut and paste that directly from your weekly meeting. The targets that you've agreed, you've set them, and you're going to give them feedback on either in a lesson or over a period of lessons. So we might just put to use rewards consistently across all lessons taught in literacy. Forgive my spellings there. So that's your foci for this week, and you're making sure you might also say in literacy and numeracy. That's what you've agreed with them. You know that at the end of the weekly meeting, you've agreed they're on track, or they might have a personal support plan. And then we've agreed we're looking at behaviour management and we're looking at professional behaviours. And the specific focus is about teacher presence and use of stickers and class dojos to motivate children. Okay. So in this instance, we've taken things from our weekly meeting and put them into a topper ready. And then during the week, once it's saved, we would then complete the boxes that are behaviour management and professional behaviours and give feedback. Now, if you only fill those two boxes in, because that's what it refers to on that front page, great. However, while you're watching that lesson, you might see some real strengths in terms of subject knowledge or teaching approaches and pedagogy or use of assessment for learning. So you can, but you don't have to, you can add strengths. What we would ask is that you don't give them too much negative feedback or areas for development, because that will cloud or make it difficult for them to see what they're focused on. If you've agreed that the observation is about rewards and their teacher persona, then the majority of the feedback should be in those areas. But I think it is really beneficial to also feedback things that you've seen that are going well, so that they've got that added boost, if you like, to keep them going. So that's another way that you might use this topper. And then finally, there is an area here where you can summarise, especially if you've used this document over a series of days, some of the things that have been evidence. So it might be that you've seen marking and evidence of following mark policy and giving rewards. You know, if you use house points or you use stickers, whatever it is, giving rewards in line with policy or practice. You might also note things down around observations of them giving verbal feedback and specific feedback, whatever that is. You can jot that into these areas. And then finally, you go through and maybe identify, so what after this feedback? Is this now that we're going to take it up a level and see this behaviour management strategy being consistently delivered across all areas of the curriculum? Are we extending it into foundation subjects? Are we actually now looking for not just the use of rewards, but maybe their use of verbal praise, however it is? So next steps. And then recommendations. So it might be advising them to go back and look at their lectures on behaviour management or professional behaviour development. It might be to go and reread the behaviour policy and familiarise themselves with the agreed procedures that you have and practices in school. It might be that you recommend that on their PPA time or CPD time, that they go and observe the behaviour specialist in the school, or go and look at the other rewards that are used across the parallel classes, whatever that is that you're recommending. We do suggest that while you're doing toppers, that you do them directly wherever possible onto this document. And we've done that on purpose to save your workload. You only need to complete one topper a week, and it can be a topper that's left open for the entire week. It can be a one-off topper for an individual lesson. However you want to use that, it's great if you can use a range of different ways of using the topper to give the student feedback. The university-based mentors will use the toppers, and some university-based mentors will come and do a bit of an observation and use the topper for that. Sometimes they'll use the topper as a template to record their visit and the professional discussions they've had with you and the student, and they may not have actually been in the classroom and seen a particular subject, because the purpose of the meeting was to come and look at student folder, check the ERPD. It might be the initial visit where they're checking that the student knows what they're doing, that they've got everything they need, and that you as an SBM can ask questions about using some of these templates or expectations. So it is a very versatile document. Again, if you are working on it over a number of days, don't submit it. Just click on an area around it to make sure it's saved, and then go back to the timeline, and it will just save what you've done and it will update it, and you can come back to it to complete it. But again, please do complete these in a timely manner. So if by the next weekly meeting there's still a topper open, we would ask that you go back and make sure that's closed off and locked off and submitted, please. Okay, so I've talked about the topper. I've talked about the WCPR. Through the placement, the other document that you will become quite heavily involved in is the professional placement discussion, what we call the PPD document. So there's one here for introductory, and then when the students join you on placement, within a couple of weeks of being on placement, they are asked to add a developing placement professional discussion. And this has replaced what used to be a document for the end of placement summative judgment. Now, just to reiterate, we don't make any judgments about where they are against the teacher standards until right at the end of their training. So this professional discussion, this placement professional discussion, is an opportunity to celebrate the students' progress and to encourage them to be able to articulate and understand their progress. So we do that through a meeting, a three-way meeting. It can be a three-way face-to-face meeting in school, or it can be done online. That depends on what you organise with your colleagues and university-based mentors and what you can accommodate in school. But essentially, the student should add this around week 2. And over the rest of the placement, they should be signposting to 3 to 5 pieces of evidence that demonstrate their progress in each of these areas. So we ask them to just signpost by perhaps adding a date and writing where the evidence is, and then a little statement about observation, feedback on phonics session, identified behaviour policy implemented effectively, and children enabled to make good progress. Okay, so we're not looking for an essay about what the evidence is. What we're looking for is the student, when they come to that final meeting, looking at this and thinking, oh yes, I've got a topper on the 12th of the 2nd, and being able to locate that topper. Also, the university-based mentor being able to come to the meeting and think, oh, I'm going to have a look at that topper in advance of the meeting, and maybe design some questions to explore and discuss why that topper was a good topper. What was it about the lesson that went well in terms of behaviour management? And they might use something called the curriculum progress guide to formulate a question. And the idea is that the student should be able to discuss, based on the topper and that aid memoir that they've just jotted there, and that piece of evidence, and then talk about why it was a good piece of evidence and what progress they've made. The purpose of that is it's a rehearsal for when they start going to interview for a job. So the idea is that they become confident in talking about their progress. Now, we know sometimes the students get tongue-tied, flummoxed, or even nervous about this meeting. And we are there to make them feel comfortable. We're not judging them. We're not coming in and saying, that's not a good enough piece of evidence. What we want them to be able to do is talk about that piece of evidence. So if they do get a bit flummoxed, it's okay for the school-based mentor to say, do you remember I said, prompt them, direct them, help them to recall what went well about that lesson, because students need to be able to use that professional language, and the only way they get to have that professional dialogue is one, through the weekly meeting with you, and two, through that three-way discussion at this meeting. So what we're looking for is 3 to 5 pieces of evidence, and ideally they should come from different sources. So we often find students put toppers there and nothing else, which is okay, but it's not a good range. So they might put their student folder and a piece of evidence there in the student folder, or they might put a weekly curriculum progress meeting, or they might put something from their breadth of experience or wherever else it is. They might have a worksheet that they've designed, or they might have a reward chart that they've designed, or a photograph that's in their student folder. The beauty of this is it should be something that prompts them to be able to talk fluently about behaviour management and where they are now. And during the meeting, somebody, whether it's yourself as an SBM or the UBM, should be making notes in there about the discussion. One thing that I would advocate is, in preparation for the meeting, is using what we call the curriculum progress guide to identify questions that we might want to ask the student and cut and paste them in there as a so it's ready for the meeting. And then during the meeting, we can just put a little commentary about how the student responded. What were the key things they said that showed us that they could talk about their progress? And then we would decide that they're on track at this point and tick that box. And in the meeting, we would then work through each of these areas. Now, we have from time to time students who do not come to that meeting prepared. And if that is the case, then you might find UBMs contacting you to say that they're not happy to proceed with that professional discussion. So we ask the students to start this early in the placement so they're not burning that midnight oil on that very last day of placement just before the meeting. And that's not good work practice. So if you could notice that they've not been putting anything in there, a little verbal prompt might be helpful, or even a target in their WCPR meeting, their weekly meeting, to get this up to speed would really be helpful. Because before the meeting, the students should know week by week whether they're on track, and if they are on track, there will be no surprises at this meeting. There is no summative judgment. There is no failed displacement. Week by week, if the student's on track, they will just carry on developing and making progress. If there is a personal support plan issued, that by ticking that box and contacting the SBM, you will flag to us that we need to have some communication about, is the student a concern? Do we need to put an intervention plan in place? Do we need to scaffold them a bit more? Do we need to have that conversation about where this placement is headed? So we should know that well before the meeting. There should be very limited situations where we get to that final week and suddenly they're not on track, because that is not the natural progression. So let me go back now, and I'm just going to show you the curriculum progress guide. So I'm just flicking back to the ITE Documents Centre, and in the resources for mentors, you'll see there is a primary ITE placement handbook, and that covers most roles and responsibilities and outlines the documents that we use, and will be a live document that you can access if you're unsure about something. But just below it, you'll see that there is this document here called Curriculum Progress Guide. Okay, so when you open it, it will show you a series of questions with progress guide. And let me just try and swap my screen so you can see that. 1 second and show you the guide. Where is it? Windows, and here it is. So hopefully you can now see the curriculum progress guide. So this has been designed and it can be used in weekly meetings if you want to start to prepare them for that narrative and discussion, or it can be used at the end of placement professional discussion. And you'll see that there are columns under each of the curriculum areas that we have of prompts and questions. You don't have to use these, but they're just to give you an indication of, well, at the end of an introductory placement, what sorts of things would we expect an introductory placement trainee be able to articulate and discuss? And similarly on developing placement. So hopefully you can see the progression. And there are ideas about the sorts of things you can signpost students to do should you feel that they're struggling in a particular area. And we've done that for each of the areas that we have as part of our curriculum. So I hope that it takes some of the hard work out of supporting a student through their progression with you over those weeks on placement. Okay, so I'm conscious that we're coming to the end of this session, so I'm just going to come back to the ERPD and just quickly show you some of the other documents. And then there are videos, as I said, around each of those. So on the ERPD, we also have the safeguarding procedures. So that template is the trainee's responsibility, and they should do that in the first week of being with you on placement. And they will receive an email if it has not been done, as that's a compliance requirement. The students should also be keeping a subject tracker. Okay, so I'm just looking for a subject tracker on here if I can find it. Discussion. This one hasn't got one on it, I don't think. Oh, here we go, subject tracker. So this is just a log of their experiences of the subjects they've engaged with. So the curriculum, whether it's the early years curriculum, Key Stage 1 or Key Stage 2, the subjects are down here. And for every placement, they should be keeping a track every few weeks of where they're at. So in the early weeks, they've probably only just observed you teaching, and they might have supported you with a group or even done some paired teaching. And week by week, they should be keeping a note of where they've done, or what they've done, should I say, in those subjects. And then they can keep a record in their folders of how that has actually progressed over the placement. The breadth of experience is a document that they use over the whole of the placements, from introductory right to developing, and it is just a log of their experiences. So if they've had lots of experiences of teaching English, they will have logged here what their experiences are. So if you're just interested in what have they done before, you can dip into this and see what's their experience of working with the age group before the year that they're in with you, or what's their experience of SEN. And then just back to the screen here, just a quick word about personal support plans. So when you're issuing a personal support plan, they need to be completed directly onto this template to let us know at the university what they've done. And schools are able to actually ask us to support you in completing that if you've never done one before. And on the website in the ITE Document Centre, there are examples of targets and kinds of resources that you might like to use to signpost the student to how they can improve in that area. So, you know, please don't feel concerned about issuing a PSP. The PSP there is a scaffold, rather like we would do with a child that's got gaps in their learning or understanding. The idea is that we can then signpost that student to focus on a particular aspect that they need to improve and give them a time limited period in which to do that. Some students can have a PSP repeated over a number of weeks, and as long as they're making progress, some students actually ask for a PSP to be there because they feel able more to focus on their needs. Some students have a PSP at the start of placement and they come to you with one because it identifies maybe they've got an additional need, maybe they've got autism, maybe they've got dyslexia, and the PSP is there to help you and the student work together and put those reasonable adjustments in place. So, you know, it might be that the student uses that PSP as a vehicle to open up dialogue with you about their reasonable adjustments. Okay. So I do want to come back for question and answer time. So we've talked about the weekly record, and there should be one of these for every week of placement. Their action plan, their personal support plans and their own action plan should be on there prior to placement starting. So it's quite reasonable to ask them, where is your personal action plan? There should be at least one topper per week for placement, which is your responsibility. And we ask that. We understand there may be a week when things happen in school and you don't get to complete a topper. So it's okay to do 2 in a week. It might be that a topper doesn't go so well and the student says, could I have another go? Can I try again? So if there are more toppers than there are weeks, that is absolutely fine as well. That's showing us that the student is asking to get feedback and engage in that cycle of continuous professional development. The student is responsible for the subject tracker, and then at the end of the placement, we will review together that professional placement discussion. There are the opportunities to add notes, but I would defer the students from adding too much to the ERPD because it does slow the ERP down. Most of the things that they should be keeping as evidence should go in the student folder. Okay, and what we'll do is midway through placement, we'll do another drop-in that will allow you to come in and check in and ask questions of us as mentors and offer some curriculum guidance so that you can get familiar with our BGU curriculum. So in these final sort of 5 minutes, I'm just going to flick onto the chat, see if there are any questions posted there. And I can see that some people have had some issues with sound or picture. Thank you, Joe, for responding there. It's very hard to type and talk, isn't it? So we are recording this and I will send this out to you as soon as it's formatted in a way that can be sent into schools, because I know sometimes videos are so large they actually go straight into spam or bounce back. So we'll make that available to you. But if there are any specific questions about the ERPD, please do post them in the chat and we'll try and answer them now. I can see that there's a question about curriculum area and somebody asking about whether it means geography or history. It is confusing, isn't it, when we talk about curriculum, but essentially, if we're talking about curriculum in terms of the RPD, we are mainly talking about our teacher training curriculum, the ITE strands that we are teaching the students and visiting theory on campus when we're talking about the toppers and WCPRs. If we're talking about national curriculum or the early years curriculum, we will make that explicit and we'll try and differentiate between the two vocabulary, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So I've got a question about the WCPR and topper. A topper is not required during prelim week unless you've done something fabulous, because trainees are not taking responsibility for any teaching during preliminary week. So a topper is required for every week of teaching placement from week 1 onwards. The WCPR, however, I would suggest that it is useful for the student to complete the reflection on the WCPR, because the students need to be reflecting and learning how to reflect and how to articulate their progression. So even if you don't do a formal meeting and it gets filled in, if the student adds a WCPR and reflects on what they've seen during first week about behaviour management policy and the expectations and structure and organisation of the school, that will be really valuable in terms of helping the student recognise what the policies and practices in place in school are. So a question around during prelim week, the student should be adding a subject tracker to the ERPD. They should be adding a WCPR to the ERPD, maybe completing things on their breadth of experience, but there is nothing for SBMs in prelim week to complete. So when you observe the students, is there a specific form? Yes, the topper is there. And if you want to look at the videos on our website, or when I send this recording out, if you want to fast forward to that bit, I did go through the topper and how that can be used in a very versatile way. So, you know, when you do look at the topper, please don't be worried about, oh my gosh, I've got to fill every aspect of this in. That is not the case. You fill the elements in that are pertinent to the type of feedback that you are giving to the student, because it's formative feedback. So sometimes that form might be used, the topper might be used all week. We have a question about the difference between current target and specific focus. Thank you for that question. Good question. I would say that the current target is cut and paste from the weekly meeting. So I always advise students that in your weekly meeting, you might add a topper in anticipation of being observed. And as you're typing the weekly meeting notes and agreeing your targets for the week, paste them straight into that topper ready. You don't have to, but I think that will be a useful way of making sure we can see that clear thread from weekly meeting, WCPR, to topper feedback, and then back into the next weekly meeting, if that makes sense. The specific focus on the ERPD might be that you've set them a target around consistently applying behaviour management strategies. And then in terms of the specific focus, you might be looking at the use of Class Dojo or stickers, or it might be the use of verbal specific praise, or it might be the use of written feedback and fly marking, whatever it is that you specifically will be looking for them using. There may be other things in terms of feedback for the children for behaviour management for children with EAL or SEN, anything like this. Okay. So is there any specific guidance for student arriving on a PSP? Good question. And I guess that depends on whether the PSP is one carried forward from a previous placement, or whether it's one that the student has to facilitate a discussion around an additional need that they have. So I would suggest that in that first weekly meeting, or that first contact with a university-based mentor, the PSP could be the catalyst for that discussion to facilitate. What we're trying to encourage the students to do is draw a line on previous placements and start afresh. So not to go over old ground in terms of this didn't go well, that was the problem, but look at it in terms of, so here we are, this is the PSP, these are the targets, how am I going to achieve them? What does the student feel they need to do to achieve them? Because after all, it is their responsibility, professional development, and it will be going forward. So it's more about a discussion of what do we need to do on this placement and how will we achieve that target? And if there's something in particular that your UBM can assist you with on that, please do contact them by email or phone, whatever it is that you've agreed, because that might be something they can talk through on that initial visit with you. Okay, I'm just going to draw breath for a moment because I've been talking at you for a long time now and just see if I've missed any other questions. Looks like mostly just initial meeting technical issues there. So we are 2 minutes over time, so I apologise for running over, but I hope that that has been useful. If there are any things that you think, oh, I'd like to hear that again, the video will be there. Or if there are things you'd like me to deliver in these twilight sessions, please do email or pass it on to your UBM and they will let me know. I understand time is precious in school, and sometimes having a forum like this is a really useful way to get information to you. But I will share a date for a drop-in again, specifically for undergraduates. So colleagues, if you are hosting a postgraduate student, I'm really pleased you could attend, and the use of the ERPD is the same for all of our primary students. But if there are PG specific queries, you've got marked contact and the UBMs. So I am posting our emails now in the chat. So Mark is the postgraduate placement lead and I am the undergraduate lead. So if there are things particularly that you need to clarify with us, please do email. And if I'm not available, I know someone who will be able to help you, okay? But thank you for your feedback. I'm glad it was helpful. And as I said, if there's anything that I've skirted over that you think, I wish you'd gone over that, please do. I will stay around for a few minutes. I'm going to stop the recording now. Otherwise, it'll be there all night. And if there's